welcome to the Freedom Journey. I'm Steve, and I'm here with my friend Clyde. As we're recording this, we're just 2 months away from a presidential election here in the United States. It's been a very highly polarizing time with friends and families often at odds, harsh words being exchanged, just down and out arguments over different political views. And Clyde has written, we're going to be talking about Christian nationalism today. And before we get started, I just want to, Clyde has written a book called World Affairs and National Politics. He's going to share many of those insights with us today. But I recommend you pick it up at studyshelf.com, or you can get it as a Kindle on Amazon. So in this series, we focus on freedom. Today, we're diving into how you can find freedom and peace during this very chaotic time, regardless of the election outcome. I grew up in a strict Mennonite community where we were pacifist and stayed completely out of politics. We didn't vote. We didn't join the military. It was just one of the many ways that we separated ourselves from the world. But in my 30s, I started listening to Rush Limbaugh. I got interested in politics. I registered to vote, participated in several presidential elections, and I get really worked up about the issues in our country, convinced that electing certain politicians would solve everything. Needless to say, I was very often disappointed. And then as I started to grasp the concept of God's sovereignty and watch the evolving political climate, especially around 2016, I began to rethink my political involvement. In a sense, I have come full circle back to my roots. The difference now, though, is I see God has a plan. He's in control. Whoever becomes president, God's plan will unfold. And I find freedom in that perspective. And even so, I get pulled into the political fray. You probably all do too. I find myself trying to stay out of it. And then I read the news or watch debates or watch YouTube clips. And then the anxiety starts creeping in again. And even though I know that God's already decided the outcome, I still sometimes feel like pushing my own political agenda. And so I have to reset. And it's kind of a reset, constant reset for me. So how do we find a place of rest amidst all the political chaos around us? So, what's the key to finding peace? So I've been looking forward to this discussion for a while. And so let's get started. So Clyde, can you share a bit of your own political background?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I appreciate your comments. And even though we were raised in a little different background in this respect, I can surely appreciate and identify in a lot of ways with the things that you said. And, an opportunity to have a really good discussion about these things probably only comes around every 4 years when the big election comes, the presidential election here in the United States. And but to give you my own background, I was raised in evangelical Christianity, and they were very political, and they had what they perceived as, and still do, I suppose, as some kind of mandate from God to be at least minimal to be involved and vote. But a lot of them see, the need to be very active and make sure that we represent God in the political arena, and that we make sure that Christians are elected and Christian principles are defended and legislated, and that we return to being a Christian nation, which is all a myth. I would later come to understand that we live in a Christian nation or ever have. It's a part of a sales pitch, a political sales pitch, a part of a patriotic sales pitch. But anyway, I didn't know all that, of course, growing up. But again, I was very. It was almost the other side of the same coin. My religion was on one side, and my government and patriotism was on the other side. Probably it's pretty summed up in something that I would always hear: God and country. God and country. They like went hand in hand, and they were intertwined and really inseparable. In fact, the pole the stage in the church where I grew up in, where the pulpit was, the podium. Yeah, there's two flags, flanking the speaker, and one is the Christian flag. Got that right out of the Bible. This Christian flag. And then on the other side was the American flag. Got that right out of the Bible too. Anyway, these two flags. So in my mind, and in Sunday school, every Sunday in Sunday school, and in vacation Bible school as a child, we would pledge allegiance to the American flag. Then we'd pledge allegiance to the Christian flag, and there was an allegiance pledge for that. And then we'd pledge allegiance to the Bible, and there was something you recited for that. And so Christianity, government and politics, and the Bible, they're all something we pledged our allegiance to as I grew up. And about that time in my youth, Jerry Falwell was kicking into high gear with his moral majority, and he would have God and country rallies. Now, Jerry Falwell was a member of the sect of evangelical Christianity that I was raised in, which is Independent Baptist, and so he's going around. So I'd participate and go to these God and country rallies, and boy, he could really work you up, about patriotism. And so from a really early age, I became involved, even way before I could vote, in political matters, and learning, which candidate stood for what, and, calling your congressman's office and writing letters to your elected officials. And I mean, like I said, before I could even vote. And yet now, interesting thing from my own background and perspective is, I don't recall ever supporting or voting for one of the two major parties, whether Democrat or Republican. In fact, I was always a part of an independent movement and a third party movement. In fact, they would lump those two parties together and call them Republicrats, and condemn them as two sides of the same coin. So I was very involved in independent and third party movements. I would have been greatly influenced by Christian radio, and over the years, the commentator, you mentioned Rush Limbaugh. I was never there. I was out of that really by the time he came along. But and then since him, there's a whole host of people who can rally the Christian vote and the Christian action. In my day, they would have been Carl McIntyre and Billy James Hargis, and just different people who I would have listened to on a regular basis, and they would tell you, about it was daily broadcast, and they'd tell you about the events of the day and how unchristian they were and unpatriotic they were, and get you all, worked up. And So, and I would have been involved in some political meetings with like Liberty Lobby and the John Birch Society, and I became a distributor of a Christian a Christian patriotic Christian nationalist newspaper that was put out every week called the Spotlight. And I was a distributor of that paper as a teenager, and getting people to get subscriptions and giving people free copies and all of that. And then when I was 17, I became the chairman of a third party, uh, the the youth division, the youth chairman of a political party, and so I was very active in that. Even the year before I could vote in the '76 campaign, um, and I mean we I was so active. I would buy sheets of plywood and make these 4x8 um, political signs for our third party candidate. I'd paint them by hand, and we would put them up, both sides, and so needless to say, just very very active in my political party and in all the local meetings and organization. And in fact, the candidate that I would have supported in '76, the Virginia, the candidate and the party got their largest votes, most votes in Virginia, which is where I was born and raised and lived at the time. So, but anyway, so and I kept being political. The last election that I can remember voting for, I stayed political until 1988. And that was probably my last active. And, I'd work the polls and hand out flyers and, go to, fairs and events for our party and our candidates. And, but somewhere between 1988, to the next presidential cycle in '92, I actually became more zealous, probably, and maybe more radicalized, Christian radicalized, I would say. And certain events would have, really would be used to stir me, and Ruby Ridge and Waco and just all kinds of things. And but by time '92 came around, my studies of the scriptures, there was some transformation going on in my life. I was a pastor by then. Well, I'd have been pastor, I started pastoring in 1980, so all through the '80s. But I was already, my study of the scriptures had already begun to cause me to be uneasy with Christianity and my role as a pastor. And it also had me become uneasy about uh, government and nationalism and politics and my place in them. I started feeling uneasy about all of that, like it was someplace I didn't belong. I didn't belong in the church. I didn't belong in the pulpit. I didn't belong at the ballot box and working the polls and supporting candidates. These things, they were true. There were verses of scriptures that would weigh on me, and I just become really troubled about all that. So, I was thinking this morning, it's been 36 years since I cast a vote. I would have never imagined growing up, and I would have never imagined in my early adulthood, and how strong I was for Christian nationalism and the whole role of Christian involved in government, I would have never imagined I would end up in a place where I'm not even voting. And, and this has been going on for 36 years now. I would have viewed myself as being un-American and unpatriotic and even unchristian in my current place and role. So anyway, that's sort of my background here.
So, what did you come to see as the main issues with Christian nationalism?
Well, yeah, like I said, the when I grew up, they were like one and the same. Your faith and your politics were just all mingled together, and but over time, I began to try to think as I would study, and again, the study of the scriptures is what really began to settle in me. Not only in my religion, I would read things in the scriptures and say, wow, I can't see anything I'm doing at church and anything I'm doing as a pastor that has any resemblance to anything I'm reading in the Bible. And the same thing would happen in my politics. And I love what you said too, by the way, earlier on, how you can get drawn back into that. It seems like I got a magnet in me that can sometimes, you can feel the pull, maybe to get back in the religious system or to get back in politics. But I tell you what, it's really freeing out here. This is a wonderful place of liberty. And then sometimes you'll just get a little taste of something and you'll say, oh my goodness, I am so thankful to be out of that. But I began to ask myself, reading the Bible, really, which nation on the planet today, or nations, are God's nations, or God's nation? Which one is his representative? What's God's favorite nation? You listen to Christian nationalists and God set up this country and it's his beacon to the world. And, is that anything like something I could understand from the scriptures, And I began to ask myself, beyond what is God's favorite nation today, but, even what's God's favorite form of government? If it's democracy, God took a long time to get here because, democracy, we're the first truly democratic nation set up on these principles. And, what about all before that? And when God does reestablish government on the earth, it's not going to be democracy. People aren't going to have a say. Let's everybody vote and decide what we want to do. It's going to be a monarchy, and really ultimately it'll be a theocracy. And so, you try to make that work in your mind and your heart as you're reading the scriptures. And then, like, even beyond what nation does God support and favor, what government, what type of government, but even like which political party, is God a Republican or a Democrat? Or maybe he's third party. Which one does he vote? If he was voting, who would he vote for? And then the more you learn about the sovereignty of God, you begin to realize, what is this really all about? What's really going on here? And so, to understand any subject, we have to know and understand. We got to get God's perspective. We got to get the big picture. So what's going on? We live in a certain period of history. We live in a certain period of God's outworkings. And what's going on today? And what's God's perspective? What's his plan? And how's he operating that today? And here's what we know. Today's man's day. It's not Christ's day. It's not the Lord's day. It's not God's day. It's man's day. And God is allowing man to demonstrate his absolute inability at living his own life and ruling himself. So we live in man's day. So how is it, I'd think about these. So how is it that I'm going to make it Christ's day? We're going to have a Christian nation. This is going to be Christ or God's day. How am I going to change the day when God has set up failure? Failure's the key to human activities and human enterprises. It's also called the present evil age, or the present wicked eon. And that's what God's decreed. That's the plan. If you don't know the plan and you think you're living for God and serving for God, but you don't even know what his plan is and what his purpose is. So this is man's day, and this is an evil eon. And we're going to somehow fix all that and make it righteous. In fact, our adversary, the adversary of God and the adversary of man, is currently the God of this world. He's the authority. He's the governmental head of this world. So how we think anything else is going to work out, like Christian nationalism, for instance. And then, of course, John said in his epistle, in his first epistle, in chapter 5, he said that the whole world is lying in the wicked one. The whole world is lying that way, So everything about this current system is broken and evil and controlled by the adversary. And I mean every aspect, political, economic, health, agriculture, family, education, everything's in ruins, and by the decree of God. And on top of it all, if you can believe this, the elections are rigged. Some of the candidates are saying this, and they've been saying it for a while. But I actually read the scriptures and found out they were rigged. I didn't learn it from a political candidate, right? For instance, Daniel, here, just read Daniel chapter 2 and verse 21. Speaking of God, he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. I was watching something recently, and they said, that there seems to be some real undercurrent and a change in the political world. Well, I know who's behind that. He changes times and seasons, he removes kings, and he sets them up. And this is getting ready to happen because the current president's not running. And so he's going to be removed, and someone else is going to be put up. Daniel 4:17 says, the Most High rules in the governments of men and gives it to whomsoever he will, and set over it the basis of men. So God's in charge of the whole political process. And our candidates, it may not look like it because we get the press releases and we get the polished, we get the commercial presentation. But who God sets up, this is his modus operandi. He sets up the basis of men. Not that that's always the case, I think. I think this is just the standard, and sometimes the pendulum swings back and forth, and sometimes I think he lets us get a little taste of something for contrast so we can know how evil it is when he sets up the basis of men. Proverbs 21 verse 1 says, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord as the rivers of water, and he turns it wherever he will. So not only does he put exactly who he wants in, but they do exactly what he wants. Biden, this is when we're making this broadcast, somebody might see it down the road, but currently Biden is the president, and God put him there and he's doing exactly what God wants him to do. He's God's servant. We're all God's servants. We're all God's vessels. We're all carrying out the play that God wrote for us. We're performing his will. And all the presidents before him were it's all rigged. And you can promote whoever you want. You can choose whoever you'd like to be president. You can choose. Yeah, go right ahead. And you can vote and you can campaign, but it's all rigged. And God is absolutely in charge. Now, here's what happens. So these are the things I begin to see and understand as I'm reading the scriptures. I come to understand the sovereignty of God. I become to understand there's something wrong with Christianity. There's something wrong with nationalism. And then I began to notice some things about me and my own behavior and the behavior of others who were involved in Christian nationalism, for instance. And Christian nationalism will breed, for instance, it breeds anger and separation and division and alienation and estrangement and contention and fighting and war, literal war. And it'll rile Christians up, kill them, get them, destroy them, destroy our enemies. And yet, Paul said we're supposed to love our enemies. And we're not supposed to reward them for the way, in the manner they're displaying to us. So instead of all those things, Christ is calling us to love and grace and peace and conciliation. How can we be conciliatory in the middle of a political debate and fight? We're picking sides. There was only ever one wall of division in humanity that God authorized. It's that middle wall of partition, the barrier wall between Jew and Gentile, and between the only divine nation that God ever established, Israel. All that's been set aside. And now we're going to pick sides and have a fight and have a contention when God has called us to love and peace and grace and conciliation. And then I notice, that this political, whatever your flavor is, whatever side you're on, it breeds arrogance and pride, where Christ calls us to humility and meekness. And Christian nationalism breeds dominion and legislation and bondage and revenge. And it's funny, there's only ever been one divine legislation. Doesn't happen in Washington. Doesn't happen in our state capitals. It was the law of Moses, and it was a divine provision of failure to show man's inability. And Christian nationalism breeds all that, where Christ breeds freedom and forgiveness and forbearance. And Christian nationalism breeds disrespect and mockery and misrepresentation and slander and censorship. Oh, you can't even watch one of your favorite shows now without seeing these political campaigns. And it doesn't matter which party it is. No one's really presenting their view. Here's the way we see that government should work and the way we see that it could be improved. No, we're just mocking and slandering. That's where Christian nationalism takes you. That's where the political process takes you. That's where patriotism takes you. And instead, Christ calls us to kindness and gentleness. And Christian nationalism breeds, the political process breeds intolerance and injustice. And Christ calls us to compassion and empathy, trying to put yourself in someone else's position and be empathetic about where they are. And probably just as much as anything else, if not more, Christian nationalism breeds and is rooted in this demand for our rights. Our rights. We are not going to be pushed around. We're going to get in charge, and our people are going to be in charge, and our beliefs are going to be in charge, and we're going to suppress and repress everyone else and so forth. So it's a demand for our rights. While Christ calls us to sacrifice our rights, to give ourselves up for others. And, Paul talking to the Corinthians says, why don't you rather suffer yourselves to be defrauded? This is who we are. This life is not the end. It's okay. And we just live ourselves in love and grace and kindness. And so I began to realize that my faith didn't match my political involvement. It not only didn't match me being a pastor, and I got out of that, but I got out of politics and I got out of the political process because I realized God's in charge of that. I'm not going to change it. He's doing exactly what he wants. And that's not my calling. That's not my place. Freedom. It's a wonderful thing while people are bickering and carrying on and fighting and having fallen outs with each other, that we're just at peace.
Absolutely. So let's take a step back. Where did nationalism originate? How did it begin?
Well, very important. And we need to ask ourselves that. How did we get here? We're born into a world and a world system that's already operating by the time we show up, and we think it's just always been this way, and that this is the standard, and everybody in every age, in every decade, in every continent, in every part of the world, their government and their way of life is the standard. It's what they know. But how did we get here? So you start off in Genesis, and there's Adam and Eve, and there's no nations, and there's no governments, and there's no politics. So how did we get from Adam to here? And if we go to the scriptures, we'll find out that the origin of nationalism is Babel. And Babel was a place. Now we have to go back and say, okay, what does the scripture say about government? What does the scripture say about dominion? Well, right in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, God gave dominion, and he gave it to Adam and Eve. They were to have dominion over the earth. And truly, the earth, its environment, its system, and those on it, there needs to be some management of them. And God vested that in the family. And most specifically in the husband and the wife, dominion was given. But when you get to Babel, what happens is there's an insurrection of family dominion and government. And there's a usurpation going on. This dominion is being usurped. And from the original divine decree and mandate. And so there is this, what we could view and term as a one world, one earthly. We're going to pull ourselves together. We're going to pull our power together. We're going to pull our resources together. And of course, nationalism is divine judgment on that action. What does God do? He confounds their languages by giving the people at Babel different languages, and it caused division, and they separated. And so now we have, as a result of that, not just one government, but we have multi-national Earth, and all as a judgment on the abandonment of the family government. So here's the important thing to know about nationalism. It starts at Babel. It's still going on today. And all governments, and the only exception when we say all, is the nation Israel. And even it is a lesson of futility, of a lesson of failure. So all governments, now that's going to change one day. This thing that's in us that wants everything fixed, we want ourselves fixed. We want our family fixed. We want the people we love fixed from all the things all the difficulties and all the wrongs. We want everything righted, and one day it will be. And it'll be righted. The family will be fixed. Individuals will be fixed. The governments will be fixed. But it'll only be God who does it. Divine, direct, visible intervention of God. But up until that point, all governments, past, present, future, all governments are rooted in usurpation of authority. And the only way you can get a new government is you have to seize the power from a previous government. You know, we're also proud to be Americans, but we seize that power from the people who had it before us, which in most of those cases, you know, was England for us in the United States. But the odd thing is they seized that power from the people who already lived here before they showed up. And they took their power, and they took their property, and they took their thing. Governments are about insurrection. You know, we're shocked at January 6th and what happened at the Capitol. It's like the Boston Tea Party. It's like burning down the legislative and government buildings of the British by the colonists. I mean, all government is rooted in usurpation of authority by seizing power from someone else. And all governments are corrupted by celestial powers and influences. And if we don't know this and understand what's going on, that all nationalism, all human government is insurrection and usurpation of authority, and it's all influenced by spiritual forces in the celestials. These are whole other topics here that we're just barely touching on. Stephen Hill did a nice talk at our last conference, and if our listeners haven't heard it, they need to listen to that. He's working on a wonderful article. I've read some of where he's at now, and it'll be in the BSM when it's done, to understand what's going on. So so there's where nationalism came from and where it began. It began at Babel, and it's all about rebellion. You know, that's how it's all about rebellion. That's how the United States started. Rebellion against Britain. You know, the Civil War is about rebellion, and there was a group. One of the parties were the rebels. It's all about rebellion. You know, again, January 6th, a rebellion. You know, and all the riots and contentions that we've had in all our history as Americans is all about rebellion. So there's nationalism.
So this might be an odd question to ask. But can you explain where Christianity came from and how it began? or maybe how the two became immersed with each other.
Does seem like an odd question. Where did Christianity come from? Because we think, well, we all know where Christianity came from. It came from Christ. And it's in the Bible. That's what the New Testament's about. And, but my journey as a young man who had a passion for God, a passion for my country, a passion for the scriptures and studying the scriptures, and it led me away from nationalism. It led me away from Christianity. I'm going to be bold enough to say this. Not that I haven't said it before, but it's a bold statement. And some of our listeners may not have heard this kind of statement. The two greatest evils on the planet, the two greatest evil systems are nationalism and Christianity. Religion in general, but Christianity specifically. And the reason among all the religions of the world, so all the nations of the world are evil and corrupt, no matter how they're presented and how they appear. And all the religions of the world are evil and corrupt. But Christianity really stands out because it bears the name of Christ. And that makes it evil multiplied. And it also attempts to bear the name and witness of God. And every evil thing and perversion about God that we know and Christ that we know and the scriptures that we know comes from Christianity. Sometimes it may seem like we're joking, but we will say, and I'm not joking, we will say, when I started studying the scriptures and started on this journey, I started realizing Christianity had something wrong. There were some things wrong about Christianity. And then as time went on, I've realized, wow, they got a lot of things wrong. And then you progress to saying, wow, I think Christianity has almost everything wrong. Until you finally get to a place where, does Christianity have anything right? So this whole idea of Christian nationalism, we take the two greatest evils of the world and its system and we merge them together into something very dangerous and very destructive. So you ask where does Christianity come from? Well, I'll tell you, and we deal with these things in the world affairs and national politics, and but Christianity does not come from Christ. He did not originate a new religion when Christ came. In fact, he was firmly planted in Judaism, and he was a minister of the circumcision to confirm the promises made to the fathers, according to Paul in Romans chapter 15. So Christianity doesn't come from Christ. And then, of course, Paul did establish something brand new. In Ephesians and Colossians, he reveals the secret administration. But it's not a new religion. It's not Christianity. It's the secret administration about the headship of Christ over the universe and him reconciling the universe to himself. What a far different message and operation than Christianity is all about. And think about it for a moment. Probably one of the most clever deceptions of the adversary is to create a religion that distorts the very person and nature of Christ and of his Father. And then you know what? People who are raised in that system, our podcast is about the freedom journey, but religion's anything but that. Christianity is anything but freedom. And people who are raised in that, we had a great advantage because, Father called us out, and he called us into faith, though, the true Christ and his true Father, which is glorious. But Christianity's made more atheists and agnostics than any movement, any system. It is an expert, Christianity is, at creating agnostics and atheists. So what a great clever plan of the adversary to take away the scriptures and take away Christ and take away God and turn them into myths. So here's the interesting thing is, so where did Christianity come from? And when did it start? It actually started 300 years after Christ was here. And here's the odd thing. It's not odd when you know that God has set up a servant who's the adversary of his work. It actually makes a lot of sense what I'm getting ready to tell you. But think about how odd this is. The system that was in place that assassinated Jesus Christ. Interesting that that's the word the concordant version uses all through the book of Acts when the accusation is coming against those who participated in the crucifixion of Christ. Over and over, the translation is that Christ was assassinated. And the system that assassinated Jesus Christ, that put him on the pole and killed him, was Rome. Rome, it was nationalism. Zealous, political, patriotic nationalism killed, assassinated Jesus Christ. 300 years later, the same system that assassinated him formed a religion in his honor. Christianity was formed by nationalism. 300 years after Rome assassinated, crucified Christ, its emperor, Constantine, established a new religion, Christianity. Nationalism's really good at this. You take a pulse of what's people like, what's popular. You take a pulse and you go with that. That's why politicians always flipping around. They're listening to the polls. And, Constantine was, if you can't beat these people, let's join them. So we're going to take over. We're going to take over the person of Christ who is here. We're going to take over his message, his ministry. We're going to take over anything that Paul taught. We're going to take over the Bible. And so Constantine formed a new religion. Nationalism created Christianity. And interestingly enough, its influence led the way that in the 11th through the 15th century, this Christian nationalism, by the way, the first Christian nationalist then was Constantine. He was the first Christian nationalist, really good at it. He merged Christianity, created Christianity, merged it with Rome. And now we got a Christian nation. The first Christian nationalist was Constantine. The first Christian nation was Rome. And it led way to the Crusades of the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th centuries, which was a military operation to convert the world to Romanism and Christianity. Here's what we know about nationalism and Christianity. They are warmongers. They are about dominance and control and gaining power and forcibly converting people to their viewpoint or killing them if they don't cooperate. Nothing's changed. The suit it wears looks different. You know, the commercial approach looks different. So nationalism created Christianity, merged them together as a unit. And now when you've got political, governmental control of people and spiritual control of people, it's the ultimate power. And the ultimate power grab in our day has been going on since the 3rd century. Christian nationalism. And many of our professed brothers and sisters will get all caught up in this movement. They'll lay aside their calling. They'll lay aside the spiritual aspects of what Christ has called us to: love, grace, acceptance, embracement. They'll lay all of that aside for this fight. That's not even our fight. We are not terrestrial. That's not our calling. Our calling is not earthly. You know, it goes back to our prior broadcast, you know, a podcast where we talked about set your affection on things above. Well, tell you what, that's not the United States government, and it's not Christianity. And you can be free. It is your family and all. I mean, all the wonderful things that we can enjoy, but these systems of bondage and evil and perversion, nothing like the adversary to suck the believer into that. And he abandons his calling. He abandons his purpose. He abandons his purpose, you know, all designed by God, of course.
Wow. I think that's some really eye-opening and as you're talking, I'm just thinking about, you know, in the name of our podcast, there's so much bondage in all of that. It's just unbelievable how our minds will get worried and we'll fret and we'll argue and complain, and all of that. So with all this in mind, and with the presidential cycle winding down, we got about 2 months. What do you think our role should be in all of this?
You know what? Our role is unchanged by world systems. Our world is unchanged by current events. It doesn't matter what's going on around us. The environment we're in. I was just listening the other day to our good friends Dean and Chris, DC Time, and they're just talking about you did a video book review of the expose of the two natures by Knock, and you got them reading the book. You got a lot of people reading the book, and they were talking about the great truths of who we are, and that we don't have two natures, and we don't have an evil nature. And I love at the end, Chris said, well, I love one thing that Dean says throughout it. He says, you know, we take too much ownership. You know, we like to own things, you know, even our sinful nature, you know, and so that's a wonderful point in that. But at the end, he says, you know, we're in an environment ripe for sin. You know, the problem's not us. The problem's our environment. So the environment changes politically, economically, nationally. The environment changes, but we don't have to change with the environment. I know it's a big call. I know there's a magnet pulling us. I know, there's a net to catch us. But we don't have to change with the ever changing systems and winds of the world, of religion, of politics. We don't have to go with it, you know. And it's funny because some people will just be quiet and calm for 3 years. And then they get all agitated. Their spirit gets agitated. They get all tied in knots and argumentative and fighting, all because some system of man changed. Paul tells us in Philippians chapter 3 and verse 14 that ours is a high calling of God in Christ Jesus. Ours is a celestial calling, not an earthly or terrestrial one. This battle's not ours. God's in the middle. God's right in the middle of showing futility of mankind to be his own God and to rule his own life. God is demonstrating failure and futility and vanity. And why would we be a part of it? Because we're all the opposite of that. What God has called us to is success. And he's called us to, and it's not worldly success. Our success is Christ, where he's seated at the right hand of the Father, So ours is a high calling. Why would I step down from my high calling and get involved in vanity and futility? So governments and politics are a diversion from who we are. What's our role? Paul says, what are we supposed to do concerning kings and all those who are in authority? He wrote to Timothy and he said that we are to pray for those. We are to pray for kings and all that are in authority. Pray. I think that was our last podcast, right? Pray. And that's I got it here up on my wall, so I won't forget it. Prayer is toward well having. We're to be toward well having to whoever our king is, and we're to be toward well having to whoever's in authority. Think about that. Toward well having. Oh my gosh! Let's destroy him. Let's get him out of power. Let's mock somebody. Let's, gets our flesh all riled up. And we're supposed to be having the king and all that are in authority in well-being. How does that work? Just like from our last podcast. You know what? Biden. Wow. We can be empathetic to a man who's ahead of us going where we might be going, maybe with dementia. And you know what we can say? I know who put you there. And I know who's had you do everything you've done while you're there. And now you're at this decline. And you know what? It's all good. It's all well. And you may not know it, but I know your outcome. I know where this is all going. It's all good. It's all good. Whoever's going to be up next, a basis of mankind, it's all going to be okay. It's all going to be, it's an experience of evil that God is putting us through for good. Romans 8:28. It's all good. It's all good. So what is he saying there? That we're to pray for kings and for all in authority that we may what? Lead a quiet and peaceable life. So what are we to do? He doesn't say vote. Vote these people out and vote some new people in. And of course, that's a new deception, the whole voting thing. Nobody could vote back then anyway. This is a 250-year-old practice, right? So, but he doesn't say overthrow the rascals. No, hold them in well-being. Hold them. Know what's going on. When we got the divine viewpoint, everything's good. We can thank God if Biden's in. We can thank God if Trump's in. We can thank God if Harris is in. We can thank God for whatever he's doing because he's so smart and he's so loving and he's got a great plan going on. And then we can do what? Lead our life in quietness and peace and honesty. Beautiful, beautiful. We can be quiet. Our souls can be calm. Dad's in charge. No mistakes. Whoever's going to be in is who he chose to be in. Anything they do in office is going to be what he chose. We can be toward well having in all of this. And the thing is, now, I will say this. I think the pull that we have, if we don't have it all the time, the pull that we have every 4 years is because we do have a political calling. And we can get confused about that during earthly terrestrial politics. Because Philippians chapter 3, verse 20 says that our citizenship is in heaven. Our citizenship is in heaven. I love the concordant. The concordant says, our realm is inherent in the heavens. This is not our realm. I'm not an American. When I was young, I had a lot of things that I held to passionately, and I was very proud of them. I was proud to be a Southerner. I was proud to be a Virginian. I was proud to be an American. And none of those are my calling. They're not who I am. They're not my realm. Now, interestingly, that word translate in the King James is translated conversation. Our conversations in heaven. Other translations like the Young's translate our citizenships in heaven. Concordance says our realm is inherent in heavens. But that word there for citizenship is the same word we get the word political from, or politics. So the Greek is saying our politics are in heaven. So the reason we get a little pull about all this is because we were meant to be in charge. We were meant to fix things governmentally. We were meant to fix the structure and order of things. And when we hear things that are going wrong, there is a natural calling in us to fix it. That territory, that realm, that dominion is just not earthly or terrestrial. It is celestial. So what do? What's our role? Well, we just keep doing what we're always doing. Let's remember that there is no barrier wall up today. It's not Republican or Democrat or left or right or liberal or conservative. In fact, Paul says in his Acts period epistles, writing to those who ministered to the saints in the local assemblies, one of their qualifications was to be pacific, to be passive. And we just can't forget who we are. And one of the tools of the adversary is to get people to do things prematurely. Even the temptation of Christ by the adversary after his 40 days of fast, we're trying to get Christ to do things before the right time, premature activity. And one day we're going to be in charge. One day we're going to be the most political as possible, as you could imagine, but just not today. So we just keep being who we are. That's all. Love, grace, peace, mercy, tenderness, empathy, compassion, embracing. We're about reconciliation, not division and separation. Freedom. We're on a journey.
We're free to love our families. We're free to love our neighbors. We're free
Yeah.
to love everyone we come in contact with. And there's nothing that we need to argue about or
No.
loving, caring, and being there for people. And
Your neighbor, our neighbor doesn't have a Harris sign up in the yard, or does, or a Trump sign, or doesn't, or no sign. We're oblivious.
Yeah.
Because this is about reconciliation of the world. And we have that high calling to live in that. Beautiful, freedom, relaxing, peace. We can live a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty.
Amen, brother. Well, thank you everyone for watching. This has been I think a timely subject for us all. Give us a lot to think about. Thank you for your boldness, Clyde, and I'm sure it'll get some people thinking about this subject and how they're relating to it. So, all right, brother, love you.
All right.
All right.
Thank you. Love you and all our brothers and sisters out there.
Amen.